This is Gareth Southgate, and this is the Three Lions podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Three Lions podcast. My name is Russell Osborne and this is an independent England football supporters podcast. I hope I find you well and I hope you've been enjoying the recent episodes that have come your way thick and fast whilst the World Cup has been on. I must admit they have been hard work to turn around in a quick time scale, but without blowing my own trumpet too hard, I don't think they've come out too badly, have they? But what I must say is thank you to all the people that have helped me along the way with them, the guests. I know that their time is precious. So thank you to those guys. If you want to go back, listen again, of course you can at your podcast provider of choice or threelionspodcast.com. Now, on to this episode. As we inch ever closer to Christmas, and you may be struggling to come up with ideas as to what to get as presents for your nearest and dearest, or indeed, what should go on your own Christmas list. I think the next 3/4 of an hour or so may help you on that. Horace Mann, he was an American educational reformer in the 1800s, once said, "A house without a book is like a room without windows." Couldn't agree more. Let me take you back to January of 2019 and episode 42 of a Three Lions podcast. I sat down with a guy called Simon Shakeshaft, otherwise known as Shaky. He mentioned the possibility of an England shirt book. Take a listen to this.
If we can take it back to the beginning of the conversation and remind ourselves of the Arsenal shirt and the Tottenham shirt, how could you elaborate on that, if you could?
Off the back of the production of these books, as we talked about earlier, there are other books going to come. And at this current time, the three authors of the Spurs shirt book, Neville, Evans, Darren Burney and myself, are in discussion with the publishers and to work with the FA on a collaboration to produce an England shirt book.
Wow.
And we're hoping that will be rubber stamped by the FA in the very, very near future. So the production of the book will be hopefully in the shops at the end of this year. If not, it'll be hopefully ready for the Euros. Of course, if England qualify.
Next. He says through gritted teeth as a Welshman.
Don't England always have easy grip?
Wow, that is the way, yes. That is fabulous news that there is the possibility of something very similar to the Arsenal and the Tottenham book, and to see them all in their glory on mannequins in glossy colour with additional details of how it all came around.
Well, obviously, the person, I'd just like to say that the person obviously putting the foundations in place now for the book, because obviously the FA are keen to do this and we want to work with them to be done. Glenn Isherwood from England Football Online, he's very much a stat man. He's an author himself. He's written 2 books on Wembley, FA Cup finals and the history, the statistics from Wembley Stadium records. Glenn's going to come on and work with me on writing the England shirt book.
Now, it took a little longer than anticipated, but what's the saying? The best things come to those that wait. And I've got a copy of the book here with me. But that episode, if you haven't heard it, it was episode 42, and it's all about England shirts. One where I got to hold an England match-worn shirt from the 2018 World Cup, and also a Bobby Moore red away shirt from, I think it was something like 1967 time. Now, football shirts are becoming increasingly popular in the last 10 or so years, I guess, especially for collectors. But with that has come various books of people sharing their collections. And I should know, I've got many of them. But the 3 Lions on a Shirt book is a marvellous coffee table publication. It's been put together by 3 football shirt enthusiasts, Darren Burney, Neville Evans, and Simon Shakeshaft, as we just heard from there, Shaky. It is available through Vision Sports Publishing website, Waterstones, Amazon, all good bookshops, as the saying goes. And here, joining me to tell us all about it from Vision Sports is Jim Drewett. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Russell.
You well?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Well, thanks for joining us. You are from Vision Sports, the publishers. What's your official title there?
So I'm the editorial director of Vision Sports Publishing, but we're a very small company. So effectively, I am pretty hands-on most of our projects. So on this book, I was the editor. So just it was my job to bring everyone together. So you've got 3 authors who you've mentioned already. So Darren Burney and Neville Evans are huge collectors of England. Well, all football shirts, but their England collections are unsurpassed. And Simon Shaky, as you've already mentioned, he's a collector as well, but really he is just the sort of guru on this subject. And he has just this rich, deep knowledge of all football shirts, particularly the England shirt. So I will do my best to represent his knowledge on your esteemed podcast.
Oh, it's very kind. And considering he's a Welshman as well, he knows a lot about England football shirts.
Absolutely. I mean, he is just the ultimate football shirt enthusiast, and the detail that he has is just unbelievable. I mean, when we first started putting this book together 5 years ago, at least, we started making a list of what we'd need. And I said, right, okay, 82 World Cup. So we need a red Admiral shirt and a white Admiral shirt. And he's like, no. Do you realize that in every single game of the 82 World Cup, a different variation of that classic Admiral shirt was worn? And then he starts talking about these great stories about the ladies at Admiral sewing on badges at the airport, trying to get shirts out for the next game. So, that's the level of detail that is in the book, and that primarily comes from Shaky.
Yeah, well, it all comes through. I mean, there's a famous picture, I think, of that 1982 team, and it may have been where they were lining up against France for the France game, and you cast your eye across the team, and the badges and the Admiral logos, they're all at different heights, where, as you say, have been sewn on last minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was basically because they played the first game against, I think it's actually the third game that is most noticeable, right, against Kuwait, I think it was.
Okay, yes. Basically,
they wore the red shirt in the first match against France in, I think it was in Seville, but it was 30-degree heat. And they were these sort of classic polyester shirts, and the players were so hot. They sent this emergency message back to Admiral that they needed some shirts made out of a different material. So they hastily produced these sort of Airtex style shirts, and that, literally little old ladies in Leicester up all night making this kit specially, and hand sewing on the badges at the last minute at the airport. So yeah, I think the individual concerned might have been a bit tired by the end, and some of the logos are not exactly in line.
That's what keeps them all unique.
Exactly.
Well,
and that also helps the collectors authenticate the shirt. So
absolutely,
they will actually check they'll look and see if an Admiral logo is a slight funny angle. That helps them say, yes, that is the exact shirt that was worn in that exact game.
Amazing stuff. Well, let's go back right to the very beginning. And it's obviously very early on in the book. England famously played their first ever game against Scotland in 1872. It was up in Scotland. It's a a game that I've covered on this podcast where I went up to the ground. I even spoke with a relative of the England captain of that day, Cuthbert Ottaway. But I also went to the National Football Museum in Manchester, of which there is a shirt from that particular game. It's the one shirt that is known to still survive. And it's in a frame. It's got low lighting at the museum. It's behind, I don't know, bulletproof glass or something. And you've managed to be able to take the shirt out, I imagine, with like white gloves and photograph it for this book and explain more about it. How did all that come about?
Well, you're exactly right. It's at the National Football Museum. They were fantastic in their support of the book. So we weren't allowed to touch it, but they had a member of staff, as you say, with the white gloves, who allowed us to take it out of the cabinet, take it into a studio and photograph it. Yeah. And it's just such an incredible thing. The fact that we call it's more of a jersey, as you know, than a shirt. It's a woolly jumper. But the fact that has survived from the very first football international is, it's astonishing. And it's just an incredible thing. You're literally in the presence of history, and that's what I think these shirts do. They allow you to sort of get close to and touch history.
Yeah, I'm looking at a picture of it now. It's worn by Arnold Kirky Smith. And it's a woolen jersey. All the three lions are there, all stitched into the jumper. And the thing with these early shirts that they were sort of jumpers, woolen, and they must have been so itchy and so heavy when it rained.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, to think you play football in that. And also it's believed that, that at this stage, the players weren't probably provided with their own shirt. So he would have been told to bring along a white shirt or a white jumper, given some instructions probably of what the badge should look like. And, for all we know, his mum embroidered the badge. If you look at the early photos of England shirts, the badges are all different because different people have been embroidering them or making the badges. So, and also the fact is that we know it's from that game because that was the only game he ever played for England. So it's a sort of authenticator's dream.
Yeah. And whoever stitched it has done a fabulous job. They'd probably get a job these days as well. It's so detailed. They would have
got a good job with Admiral in the 80s.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's so many shirts within the book we could talk about and cover, but we're going to sort of just pick a few here and there as almost a little teaser for listeners that they can go out and explore more into it. But there's a couple of great stories in there where obviously some of these older shirts are so hard to come about. They're probably left in lofts or passed on to various family members and whatnot. It's just tracing it all down. But there was one where I read that one of them had been put on a pile to go to a jumble sale, and whoever was going to take it to a jumble sale sort of decided, no, it's too good to go to a jumble sale, and it got kept, fortunately. And I think this is from the 1900s, and is still around to this day now. And that's the sort of thing that happened back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the oldest shirt in the book, so it was worn, believed to have been worn by a guy called Bobby Evans against Wales in 1911. The shirt belonged to a Welsh player called Ted Vizard. So the assumption is that, usually in those days, players would swap with their opposing player. So we've kind of worked out that Ted Vizard's opposing player was Bobby Evans. So it went into Ted Vizard's family, and 60 years later, his wife in the 70s was having a clear out, and she gave this old shirt, which is, a musty old dress shirt, huge, great thing. She gave it to her cleaner to take towards a jumble sale. Unfortunately for England, football shirt history, the cleaner thought, hold on a minute, this is actually something worth holding on to. So she kept it. And when she died, she left it to her sons. So it survived.
It's amazing sort of piece of history that has managed to survive. And shirts, you say they were dress shirts then. They were ones that you sort of put over your head and slip on. They just had like 3 or 4 buttons down the front of them. Like as you could open them, it'd be like a massive V-neck. And it just, again, they had the crest stitched into them, but they had cuffs on the sleeves as well.
I mean, they were essentially, everyday shirts at the beginning. They weren't produced by Umbro or Buckter or companies whose names we associate with football kit. They were Hope Brothers and St. Blaise and Kinch and Lack, which were basically outfitters. And the badges were sewn on. And interestingly, the badge was considered more valuable than the shirt in those early days. So although a lot of the early shirts have survived, because from very early on, England players were generally given their shirts after they'd played, but a lot of players removed the badges and kept the badges, and they were considered the kind of the souvenir and the valuable item. And, the shirts were just thrown away. In fact, Tom Finney famously took all the badges off a load of shirts and gave the shirts away to a local Sunday League team in Preston.
Oh, right.
So you would have had at some point in the late 50s or 60s, a Sunday League team in Preston all running around in Tom Finney's ex-England kit, which must have been a sight to see because they were probably all number 7.
Oh, of course, yeah. Oh, great stuff. Well, just whilst we're talking of badges and the famous 3 lions crest, nowadays, and we're talking this especially whilst the World Cup is taking place, every shirt has the match details on it.
Yeah.
It'll tell you the date, it will tell you the opponent and the tournament, but it's nothing new really, because we sort of fast forward to the 1950s, and back then they were put in the season, be it 1950-51, and underneath it would say sort of versus Yugoslavia or someone like that. So it's not a new thing putting match details on shirts, is it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that was a sort of a period of about 10 years when that happened. And it was, as you say, there was a sort of very lovely scroll with the opponent and the season, below it, which was quite unusual, I think, in international football, but it was only that for that period of 10 years. Umbro then resurrected it when they did the Tailored by Umbro.
Oh, yes.
If you remember, in 2009, they sort of replicated that style. So but it was a nice touch.
Yeah. We're going to go backwards and forwards, I think, we're in this chat with so many different things to talk about. But there's one shirt that I came across, and I always knew that England first played in as an away colour blue before they played in red, and I think people often forget this, and when a new shirt comes out and it may not be a red away shirt, they say, we should always have red as our away shirt, and obviously we know that's probably because of the 66 win, which of course we'll touch on. But the first away shirt was worn in 1935 against Germany. It was actually played at home, but there's a picture of that in the book, and it's such a deep blue. Yeah,
it's an amazing shirt. It was worn by Stanley Matthews against Germany, played at White Hart Lane. Quite a famous match because it was obviously Hitler was in power in Germany. There was a lot of concern about what was going on. They actually flew a swastika flag at White Hart Lane, which is unbelievable if you really deconstruct that. And there are famous photos of the German fans and players doing the Nazi salute but it was actually, this was England's 200th international, and it was the first time they ever played in any colour other than white. And yeah, it's this beautiful, quite dark blue dress shirt with a white collar, white cuffs, and a white badge, made by St. Blaise. And I remember when we were doing the photo shoot, literally people's jaws dropped when we had it out, and it's just a magnificent thing.
So who is that? Part of the Stanley Matthews family's collection? Is that one?
Do you know, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure how. Quite often I believe that was from the Matthews family. I don't think it was one that was swapped. Quite often shirts come into the sort of collector's market from a player that the player swapped with, if you see what I mean. So a German player might sell a shirt that they've swapped. I believe this does originate from the sort of Matthews family.
So
apparently he had a terrible game as well.
Well, I don't think he had many of those.
No, I don't think so.
I think actually, yes, he's saying about that in the write up on the other side of the page. It does say that as he walked away from the game in amongst like a lot of the supporters were saying that he had a poor game, and that sort of knocked his confidence.
Yeah, reduced to tears by their critical comments, apparently.
Yeah.
But, he recovered okay.
He done all right, didn't he? On this particular page, it shows the manufacturer, and you've mentioned a few at the moment, like St. Blaise and Bukta. Before we get to sort of the nowadays of Nike and Umbro, before that, England have had quite a few of these manufacturers, and I know yourselves, Vision Sports, have done other football shirt books, notably like the Arsenal one, and there's a Tottenham Hotspur one as well, and these sort of manufacturers' names are sort of crop up quite often, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, St. Blaise, I think by this stage you had traditional outfitters and sort of dress shirt companies making sports specific shirts, where they were just really the same kind of design and cut as everyday shirts, but perhaps slightly lighter and, available in the sort of colors that you wouldn't wear to work, for instance. So yeah, but these are, they are tailored, companies. Hope Brothers is a very interesting one, where that was I think they were set up after the war, and they employed, they were in a village and they employed a huge number of people in this village. And I think they carried on in operation until I think they were sold to Burberry in the late 90s.
Okay.
So, but yeah, they're sort of famous names if you delve into the sort of world of these sort of shirt manufacturers back in these times.
Yeah, that's some really interesting names and that sort of thing there. There was I haven't made a note of which shirt this particularly was now, but I saw there was one shirt where England on occasions would have to change the colour of their socks if they were facing an opponent with obviously the same colour socks. But England would change, or the colour of their socks, whatever they wore, would then be the same as the number on their back. So if they wore, for example, red socks, the number on their back would be red, or it would be blue, number would be blue, which I'd never even noticed or knew before.
It's brilliant attention to detail, isn't it? I mean, you're talking around the sort of late 40s and 50s, and it just shows the attention to detail in kit was thought about even then. So a lot of the games were played against the likes of Ireland and Scotland, who wore either very dark blue or black socks. And it was just usually the first choice, my understanding is the first choice color of socks was black, and a black number would be put on the shirt when they were wearing black socks. But as you say, when they deemed that the sock color was too similar, they wore red socks instead and wore a red number.
Yeah.
which you know never really kind of, because all the photos from that time are black and white, you never really get a feeling for that until you then see, hold on a minute, we've got two shirts from the same season. One's got a black number and one's got a red number. What's that all about? And then, you know, that's where Shaky comes in. He's done all this research and analysis of black and white photography to work out, you know, from the black and white photography, whether the color is actually red or black.
Yeah, this is the sort of detail this book holds within it. It's amazing.
And Russ, just one thing on because we're talking about the blue first away shirt.
Yeah.
Then it's quite an interesting story. The first time red was used as an away color was in 1947, when actually it was an FA 11 officially rather than an England team, just after the war, obviously, were due to play a match against Switzerland B, who played in white. So they obviously had to come up with a kit, and they wore these red short sleeve shirts, which apparently were borrowed from the RAF.
Right.
So, you know, the RAF would have had a team. So, you know, you can make a strong argument for the fact that England ended up with this kind of famous red as their famous away color, because they borrowed the kit that they happened to manage to borrow was red,
courtesy of the RAF.
Yeah,
there you go. I mean, I was just going to go back to blue very quickly, because there was whilst this book has got, it would appear almost every single shirt. It's not exactly the case, but there's so many in there. Am I right in saying possibly the one shirt that sort of is yet to be unearthed or is evaded the collector so far is from the World Cup of 1950, England's first ever World Cup, where famously we lost to the USA, and we were wearing blue that day, but a shirt from that game has never come to light.
Yeah, I mean, Darren and Neville will tell you that is the sort of holy grail of England shirts. They would love to find one of those, albeit one with bad memories.
Yeah.
It was a blue short sleeved shirt with a red number, apparently. Worn in this famous defeat to the USA, which may well have prompted red becoming the main choice of color. Some people believe that, you know, it was such a terrible defeat and blue became sort of forever tainted with that match. So then when they needed to change colors in 1951, when they played Argentina, they wore red. It may well be because of that.
That's almost similar to the story, I believe, with Brazil when I think they lost it may have been the 1950 World Cup final against Uruguay, where I believe they wore white, and then they decided we can't wear white again because we've lost to Uruguay in the final. I think off the top of my head.
I think that's right. I've heard that story before. Yeah, absolutely. So Brazil, you know, you would associate Brazil with that yellow shirts with the green collars, and as you say, that wasn't their original kit.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, we've segued nicely on there to yellow shirts. Many people may not be aware that England have worn on a very odd occasion yellow as their outfield shirt. I know that obviously goalkeepers have often worn yellow, but I think during the 1970 World Cup, I think they wore yellow.
It was after the 1970 World Cup, so it was in 1973. They wore yellow 3 times, the only 3 times that the senior team has worn yellow. And this was because of Sir Alf Ramsey's obsession with, he thought that red was too dark a colour to wear in hot weather.
Okay.
So for the 1970 so obviously England won the World Cup in 66 in red. 1970 World Cup played in Mexico, high altitude, really high temperatures. So he decided they couldn't have a red away kit for that World Cup. They would have light blue, and they had an all light blue kit for that World Cup. They played, I think it was their second game. They played Czechoslovakia
Yes.
in this blue kit. It was really bright sunshine, and it was felt that in this bright sunshine, Czechoslovakia played in all white. There wasn't enough difference both for TV viewers and people in the stadium.
Right.
The kits were too close, and Ramsey said, "I've made a mistake." Got Umbro to hastily make a set of red shirts for the quarterfinal against West Germany, and so red was worn in that infamous match. And then in preparing for the 74 World Cup, which of course we didn't qualify for in the end, but he thought, well, blue doesn't work. In his preparations for that tournament, he thought, well, let's try yellow. So in the spring of 1973, they played 3 matches, including crucial World Cup qualifier away to Poland, which they lost 2-0, in yellow shirts, blue shorts and yellow socks. And if you look at the video of that Poland match, which is a famous defeat, it is really odd. You don't associate yellow with England at all.
No. And I'm wondering, it's the way sort of shirts are now, and manufacturers sort of going back a few years and sort of, I don't know, revisiting different designs and that sort of thing. I wonder whether one day England will see another yellow shirt, or is that not likely to happen?
I wouldn't be surprised. Nike have a hard job coming up with new. I think they have a sort of unspoken rule that when it comes to World Cup kits, the away kit will always be red.
Right.
But in the intervening period, it's invariably going to be another colour. We've had different shades of blue so far. Will they dare try yellow? I don't know. I don't know how well it would go down.
Yeah, I'm sceptical, me personally, but never say never. Well, we can't not skip past 1966. Obviously, the height of England's fame. There's shirts from in the collection here in the book from the game against Argentina. There's one from obviously the final against West Germany. These really are pieces of history, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. I mean, they are. When we're photographing them and you're handed a shirt that's been worn in English football, English sporting history's finest moment, you really are touching history. And there's great stories about what happened to all those shirts, because at the time, the players certainly didn't really consider, what historic artifacts they would become. Loads of the players swapped with Germans and never saw their shirts again. Well, several of the players, Bobby Charlton, for instance, swapped with Uwe Seeler, and I think in 2006, when he was working with the FA on our World Cup bid, he contacted Seeler and said, "Look, I'd really like to get my shirt back." And Seeler said, "Oh, I had a bit of a clear out and I think it's got chucked out." Martin Peters said swapping his shirt was the biggest regret of his life. It's rich stories. But the best story of all, I think, is Alan Ball and Nobby Stiles, who shared, they were roommates during the World Cup. They had a sort of personal pact that if they got to the final, they would swap shirts with each other. Whatever the result. So after the match, they swap shirts, and Alan Ball goes home to his mum and dad in Blackpool, hands his dirty kit to his mum to wash. She washes it, puts it up in the loft, and then in 1970, when their son was going off to play in Mexico, they got it out of the loft and did a deal with a local TV rental shop to lend them Nobby Stiles' shirt to have in the window in return for a colour TV to watch the 70 World Cup on. So just crazy stuff, really.
Oh, that's amazing. And the fact that Jeff Hurst's shirt is still in one piece and with us is great. Is that still Jeff Hurst's shirt, or is that in different hands now? Or?
No, Sir Jeff sold it at auction several years ago, so it's in the hands of a private collector, but it's on display at the National Football Museum. So a lot of the shirts in the book and are owned by collectors, but on loan at the National Football Museum. So they're quite aware of, the collectors are quite aware of I think generally their responsibility to share this history, which is another reason for the book. They've got a lot of, Neville and Darren particularly have got, these historic items which aren't seen on public view, all of them. So this was the book is a way of sharing them with England fans everywhere.
Yeah, it's another reason to get this book and take a look through it. So yeah, 1966, of course, England's finest hour for the men there, but also within the book, and rightly so, are the women, and who of course celebrated their finest hour with the Euros this year. How hard was it to come across some of the women's shirts?
The early shirts, very tricky, and we couldn't get hold. We couldn't find everything. I think, funny enough, as soon as we conceived this book, we felt that straight away it was appropriate to include the women's team in the history. It's 3 lines on a shirt. Since in the mid 1990s, the Lionesses, or the women's team, have been under the umbrella of the FA, so they've worn the same 3 lions crest as the men. So what we decided to do was to tell the story of the women's team's shirts separately, but then to incorporate, once I think it was 2018 when the Lionesses had their own bespoke design for the World Cup.
Ah, yes.
We then decided, because that was a unique shirt to that team, we would then include that in the main timeline of England football jerseys. So we started to put together this sort of feature looking at the history, and it's the history of the England women's shirt sort of tells the history of the England's women's team. When they were 1972, the ban on them playing was lifted by the FA. So the first England women's international was in 1972. But the FA allowed the women to play, but they didn't really have any involvement. There was a separate women's FA who had their own version of the 3 lions crest. No kit was provided for them. They had to literally go out and beg, borrow and steal kit. So you've got, we tracked down as many of the early players we could to try and find out what they were wearing. They started with very plain sort of 70s shirts, very similar to the men's. They were wearing sort of hockey shirts in the late 70s. They played a tournament in Japan, and there are some England shirts made by Asics, which were given to them by the tournament organisers. There's a company called Spal, who some listeners will remember from the sort of late 80s. They provided the kit for a number of years based on the fact that someone at the WFA used to work for Blackburn, and Spal provided their kit as well, and they asked for a favour. Then there's a famous, well, maybe not that famous, but there's an amazing Ribeiro kit that was worn in the early 90s, which is a sort of white shirt with this kind of crazy blue pattern down the side, and the shorts repeat the pattern.
That's almost one that wouldn't go amiss at like Wimbledon, the tennis tournament. That one. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, very much so. It doesn't really look like a football shirt, and the shorts are wild. So we've tracked down quite a few of those shirts and photographed them. there'll be England shirts that people have never seen before. And then when the FA said, right, we'll take over, the women were, for the first sort of 10 years or so, they were given sort of the same shirts as the men. So often these were completely, there was no sort of women's cut. They were absolutely massive on some of the players. You see these photos of the sort of women with the shirts sort of tucked in and, holding out their arms, and they've got these huge sort of flaps of material under their arms.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I think it was around 2004 that Umbro produced the first version of the men's shirt in a sort of women's cut. And then it sort of evolved from there until finally Nike decided that, and rightly in my opinion, that the women's team deserved their own sort of identity within the overall framework of the Three Lions, and that's what's happened.
Yeah, no, it's a great feature on it, and I've read it in the book, and obviously we've spoken about that very first England shirt worn by Arnold Kirky Smith back in 1872, and then 100 years later, just by pure coincidence, that the women then played their first game, and there isn't a shirt from that game. It's so unfortunate.
No, like that. Those shirts would have been sort of worn many, many times. The women weren't given those shirts. The WFA, had no budget or finances to speak of, so I think they were given a set of shirts for that first game, but they would have been used over and over again, and unfortunately none have survived.
Yeah. Well, all these shirts are, of course, worn by all these famous players that we see on the telly or we see inside the stadiums, and we all idolise as young children and grow up remembering these shirts that they all wore. But at the same time, there's someone who has to look after these shirts before the players put them on, and basically put them on the pegs and all that sort of thing. And there's a great part of the book where you speak with the various kit men over the years.
I mean, we really, the feature's really based on the current kit men, so Pat Frost and Neil Jones. The FA, this is an official FA book, so they were great in giving us access to those two guys. So they are sort of joint kit men of the current senior team, men's team. They were brought in by Gareth Southgate when he came in, and it's evident from meeting those two that they're not just kit men. They're part of the team bonding, the team spirit. They're joking. They're just really sort of fun, happy, cheerful guys. They run this, what is now a massive operation. If you think how many shirts are required for a World Cup, and the sleeve patches, as you've mentioned already, the match detail for each game is printed underneath the Three Lions crest. Even now that the FA introduced legacy numbers, each player has their legacy number printed on the inside of the neck of the shirt as well, which is incidentally how you can tell it's an authentic player shirt.
No, of course.
It's a huge operation. I think they told me that they'll be taking 5 tons of kit to Qatar, and what they do is when a new player arrives, a new player is selected to the squad, the first thing they do is they sort of take down all their measurements. So they've got this big spreadsheet of what size every player is in shirts, shorts, socks, tracksuits, everything. Yeah, they before the World Cup, they would have had all the shirts printed up for the first 3 games when it was known that we were playing in white, and then they'd have printed up enough shirts with squad names and numbers for all eventualities, in hopefully all the way to the final.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I mean the attention to detail is incredible. So underneath the Three Lions crest, they have the name of the opponent and the date of the match, and they told me that they had worked out every possible opponent that England could play in the World Cup, and every possible date that they could have played them on, and they had those match details already made, so they only had to select the correct one and heat press it onto the shirts, depending on who we face and how far we go.
Wow, really?
They said that no other country, they don't believe any other country goes to that level of organisation.
Wow, it's great to hear that little insight of how those guys work.
I mean, I'm hoping, of course. So we've only played in white so far. So, but I think the red kit looks stunning. So I'm hoping we get to wear it, perhaps in the final against Brazil. That would be the kit aficionado's dream final, I think.
Yeah, wouldn't it just? Well, actually, you mentioned Brazil, and there was one. I realised we're going on a bit here, but there's one little story that I really like, and I'll ask you maybe what your best story is from the book. But England versus Brazil in 1970. There's a famous picture of Pelé and Bobby Moore embracing after the game because they had a right ding-dong in that game, and they both swapped shirts. And Bobby Moore's shirt has got a little bit of a story behind it.
Yeah, so there's a famous photograph of them embracing, and they've both got each other's shirts in their hands. And Pelé then, after the World Cup, gave Bobby Moore's shirt to a friend of his who ran a bar in Rio de Janeiro, where it was sort of mounted on the wall, folded and mounted on the wall for years and years, accumulating nicotine stains until it was rescued. I think in around early 2000s, it was rescued. Someone discovered it, and it made its way to a collector. So it's photographed in the book. And it's this Airtex material that Alf Ramsey experimented with, and they wore in 1970. So really lightweight with all these little holes for ventilation. So it's a white shirt, but it's got these kind of brown nicotine stains in a sort of square where you can see where the shirt would have been framed.
Yeah, no, it's so simple, yet the story and the history behind it is great. Doing this project, there must be a favourite of yours, is there?
Favourite shirt? Well, I mean, I think the 1935 Stanley Matthews shirt that we've talked about is a favourite. I mean, for me, if I was to choose my favourite England shirt of all time, which sort of tells you a little bit about my age, would be the World in Motion blue 1990 away kit, which was worn obviously in the World in Motion video.
Yes.
And you see it everywhere on the terraces now, so I'm obviously not alone. But yeah, that's just, I mean, that was the first time England had a really sort of daring design. If everything had been plain colours up until then, and it was on the back of the sort of acid house craze, and it was actually the away kit, the designated away kit for the 1990 World Cup, but was never worn. England wore white in all 7 matches in 1990. And that style was only ever worn once, a year later, I think. But it's become, cult classic. And I love the story about, and this is one of Shakey's amazing bits of information. So if you sort of visualize the shirt, it's got a sort of pattern of diamonds within the material, and apparently that design was created by someone shining a torch through a cut glass ashtray and sort of projecting that image on the wall or on a white piece of paper, and that's where that famous pattern comes from.
Well, I never. That's the sort of insight into this book that it holds, and I can't recommend this book highly enough. Once again, do you want to give a plug to where you can sort of purchase this book?
Sure, absolutely, Russell. Thanks. So if there is a website called 3lionsonashirt.co.uk where you can buy the regular edition. There's also a manager's edition, which we had 250 copies. I think there's a few left, signed by Gareth Southgate, and that comes in its own sort of leather box. And there's also a collector's edition, which comes with a sort of art print of 9 classic England shirts. It is available. The standard edition is available through, all other general bookshops. So yeah, thank you very much for your kind words. It was a real labour of love. We're really proud of this book, and I think it's one for England fans everywhere.
Absolutely, it's one that should go under lots of people's Christmas tree, I think.
Hopefully we'll have a new edition with a famous shirt from the next couple of weeks in it soon.
Let's keep our fingers crossed. Jim, thank you very much for your time, and please pass on our regards to Simon, Darren, and Neville too. Without them, this book just wouldn't be there. So for keeping all these memories alive,
I will do.
My many thanks go to Jim Drewett there from Vision Sports Publishing. The book is called 3 Lions on a Shirt. Go search it out. The detail, amazing. The only thing I'd have loved to maybe have seen accompany it would be a YouTube film of sorts, perhaps documenting them speaking with some of the players about the shirts, showing some of the stories about how they came about them in film-like way, showing them, photographing them, those sort of things. Anyway, well done to all concerned with it. As always, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's always appreciated. If you're new to the show, welcome along. I've got plenty more episodes in the planning stages for the future, so hopefully you'll be able to join me for those. Stay subscribed, tell your friends, and if you have missed some of them, all previous episodes can be found at your podcast provider of choice, or indeed 3lionspodcast.com. And don't forget, the show, it can be found on the likes of Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Just search 3 Lions Podcast. Take care of yourselves, and we'll speak again soon. Cheers!